Oh, there we go. I'm on. Well, it's not quite 9:45, so we'll give, in case anybody else walks in for a second, we'll give them another minute to get here. We do have handouts that I'm not going to hand out now because then you won't listen. You'll read. So we have those. We'll hand those out at the end if you would still like to take some information with you. And yeah, so we have those. Okay. Welcome. I'm going to go ahead and start to this presentation about our Fresco Outreach Ministry. We intend for this to be brief, and we will have a time for questions and answers. So everybody who is a part of our Fresco Outreach Ministry ad hoc committee, that's what I'm calling it. All of those folks are here this morning. Jenny, Norma, Cully, Alice, Jonathan, Tessa, and me. So we will be here to answer questions if we haven't answered them and what we have to share. Okay. So, Thomas, if you'll advance to the next slide, I'm going to give you a very brief history of how we got here. In October of 2021, when we were in the throes of our It Is Time campaign, a member of this congregation came here on a Sunday morning. He spoke to Alice, and then he spoke to me, and he said he'd had a dream in the night that woke him up, and he couldn't go back to sleep, that as a part of our campaign, we needed a Ben Long fresco at Rumple. And we said, wow. We took it to the It Is Time campaign committee, and that group said, it's a lovely idea. It's a huge expense. We are far into the campaign. We just don't feel like we can do that right now. Fast forward a few months. Technically, Linda Malden received a phone call when she was volunteering in the office. A gentleman who we did not know called and said he wanted to talk to me about Ben Long frescoes. And I think if I had gotten that call without having what had happened in October, I might have said, thank you very much, but I'm not really interested in talking to you. But I thought, So he came the next day, sat down and spoke with me and told me he had, in his retirement, developed a passion for Ben Long's frescoes, had discovered there were 2 frescoes of his that were kind of hidden away, not being seen and appreciated in Charleston, South Carolina, and that the folks who had them, who owned them, were not particularly connected to them and might be willing to part with them. And he found out, also doing his research, that carefully you can move frescoes. And so he began to look for a home for them so that they could be added to the fresco trail that already exists here in this part of North Carolina. I think many of you, I see lots of people nodding, are familiar that there are a number of Ben Long's frescoes that stretch from Ashe County down to Morganton, and then there are also a number in Charlotte. And so I went back to some of the folks who'd been a part of those conversations in October and said, hey, we have this amazing opportunity. And so we began to pursue it further. And that has continued over the last, I guess it's 5 months now. I'm looking at Cully and Alice because they were a part of some of those first conversations with Jim Walters. We have done a lot of research, made a lot of connections. Jonathan is going to talk in a moment about his recent trip to Charleston to actually see the frescoes and learn more about it. All of the details are not yet figured out, but many of them have been. And so we can answer some more of those at the end. Fine Art Moving Company out of Charlotte, one of the companies that the folks at Brom recommended, but that just Jim Walters did research for us, have also made a trip to Charleston and have a proposed plan for how they can remove the frescoes from where they are and move them and store them until we are ready to place them here. We anticipate that the cost of these 2 frescoes, and you will see them in a minute when Jonathan gets ready to talk, the cost to purchase them from this hospice in Charleston who currently owns them, and to move them, to insure them, to store them, and then to make sure we have the right space set up the right way here to display them will cost about $250,000 possibly a little bit more. The session has had lots of conversations about this. I think this is an important piece to share. If you speak with any of the elders, they will share that they have had extensive conversations over multiple meetings. And one of the questions that they continued to ask and answer for themselves was, that's a lot of money, right? That's a lot of money. And we hear regularly here on Sunday morning that we have hungry neighbors and concerns in our local community. And they continued to weigh that and weigh the opportunity that the session believes we have to continue to open our space to more and more people. That has continued to be part of our vision and our mission. We are in this capital campaign and redesigning our space to open it up to the community. And we have confirmed with the folks in Ashe County that between 40 and 50,000 people come into those churches every year to see the frescoes that are there. So to me, that is far beyond the number of people I thought we could open our new spaces to when we think about those kinds of numbers. And the hope is that that brings new people in. They encounter these frescoes which depict Scripture, offers people an opportunity to maybe engage. I think it's related to some of what I was saying this morning in my sermon, right? With a smaller and smaller percentage of the country even knowing anything about Scripture or knowing any of the stories, we have an amazing opportunity. And we also know that the Fresco ministries on the Fresco Trail do generate income, and while the session hasn't determined that, I think it's fair to say, and there's a few elders here nodding, that the session feels very strongly that if this Fresco outreach ministry does bring new income into Rumple, that income would be then shared with missions. I think that was the overwhelming feeling of the session. I think that's all I want to tell you right now, and I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan, who's going to talk about his recent visit to Charleston, and you'll get to see the frescoes.
Good morning, everybody. Cully called me some weeks ago to say that there was a possibility that Rumple might have the opportunity to acquire 2 Ben Long frescoes, and I immediately flashed back 35 years with my first connection with Ben Long when a family friend who had been his longtime agent was appointed to the board of the North Carolina Museum of Art. That was my first time learning about the frescoes and Ben Long's mastery. Cully called me because the church would need some legal work, and I'm a lawyer, to make sure that we had got good title and make sure that ownership was properly transferred should we be lucky enough to acquire them. What an interesting coincidence, I thought, that my long ago connection would come back full circle. As I learned more about the frescoes, I also learned that they were commissioned by a lady named Mabel Stowe Query, who was from Belmont. She was a Stowe. My mother was a Stowe, and further examination turned out that Mabel was my grandfather's first cousin. So another coincidence. I shared my excitement about this possibility with Kathy, Cully, and the other members of the Fresco Committee, and I was quite energized and volunteered to go to Charleston to view the paintings. The purpose of that was to make sure that they were in good shape, sound, and as advertised, if you say. To help me with that, I called a friend of mine from college who runs a fine artwork restoration laboratory in Columbia, South Carolina. She enthusiastically agreed to go to Charleston to view the frescoes. And in another coincidence, her father had been part of commissioning Ben's frescoes at First Presbyterian in Charlotte. She told me she still had a brush that Ben used for that masterpiece. Next, she told me that her colleague, her right-hand person in her lab, had studied frescoes in Italy. That's right, another fine coincidence. In any event, we traveled to Charleston to view the paintings along with my daughter, who is an art history major at Wofford. After a thorough examination of both frescoes, my friend and her colleague have given the church their professional opinion in writing that the frescoes are sound and are in good shape. Now, I'm certainly no art expert, but I can tell you that the two pieces are absolutely stunning. The larger of the two is Ben Long's artistic interpretation of the 23rd Psalm. It is almost 7 feet tall and a full 15 feet wide. In person, its imagery absolutely draws you to it. When you see it in person, you might think you will take a glance and move on to something else. I'm confident you will not. You will want to gaze at it, contemplate it, and you will move from image to image within the piece itself. It is truly inspirational. The smaller piece, and it is not small at all, it is a little larger than 5 feet by 8 feet. Frankly, I was prepared for the quote, little one to be a lesser work, but it's nothing of the sort. It's Ben's interpretation of the Good Shepherd. It is peaceful and it is serene. It takes you to the Good Shepherd. We were there to examine the condition of the works, but they made us all pause. We traveled to Charleston to examine and make sure the frescoes are in good and proper shape. They are, and we have a professional opinion that tells us that. My hope today, however, after viewing these pieces firsthand, is to relate to you the quiet power of these works and to provide a glimpse into how these magnificent pieces can help our Rumple family share them with our community and the greater world. And through that ministry, and this is the important part, glorify God and share the gospel of Christ. I appreciate being a part of this wonderful opportunity.
That is the extent of our presentation for today. But as I said, all of the members of this committee are here, and we are happy to entertain any questions you might have that we didn't answer. John? Cully, you want to, or do you want to? I think you know most of those details now, don't you?
John, the frescoes are painted on a separate board. They're not painted against the wall. They are attached to the wall with metal pieces that we've got to carefully cut those metal pieces. The moving company, I've talked to the CEO a bunch of times, as has Jim Walters, who is working with us. The frescoes are currently in a wooden frame. We're going to fabricate steel frames to put them in so that as they are moved, they will not bend, because if they bend, then that might pop the paint. So all of that is being very carefully worked out with the moving company. This moving company is headquartered in New York. They have offices in Charlotte, Los Angeles, and Miami. They have moved frescoes before. They're not at all intimidated by the idea of moving these frescoes. And so we, like everything else, it's a process, but we're working it out.
If there aren't any other questions that you want to ask to the large group, all of us will remain here if you want to ask individual questions. We do have these handouts, and we do hope that this is a ministry that everyone who has any interest or excitement will be able to be a part of. There are lots of ways that we anticipate this ministry certainly changing, and it's an incredible opportunity for us, and I think Jonathan said that so well. And it will be an opportunity that we will need lots and lots of hands and hearts to be a part of it going forward. So, yes. And right now, one of the many opportunities is contributions to these ministries. So if that's something you would like to consider or feel called to do, you can speak with any of us on the committee as well. So thank you. That concludes our presentation, and we have a handout if you'd like to take one with you.